Hello, and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. And I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. So, what we're going to talk about is a big question. How do you kickstart an industry? The $100 million XPrize for Carbon Removal recently announced its 15 winners of the first stage of a competition to achieve gigaton-scale carbon removal. And with more than 1,300 entrants in this XPrize process, the Carbon Removal Prize may be the largest experiment in innovation in human history. The goal is to lower the cost of carbon removal to well below $100 per ton, and ultimately to return atmospheric CO2 levels to pre-industrial levels. Our guests today are XPrize Carbon Removal Executive Director Nikki Batchelor and Mike Leitch, who is the technical leader on the project, and they're here to talk about where we are in the process. The 15 milestone winners in the competition earned $1 million each, and when the final awards are made in 2025, the winner will receive a $50 million prize, and the runners-up will split $30 million. Both for-profit and university teams were among this year's winners, and they represent a variety of natural and technical approaches to capturing CO2 from the air and sequestering that carbon dioxide in ocean, farmland, and rock formations. Let's explore some of these strategies and get a sense of how the nascent carbon removal industry is taking shape. You can learn more about the XPrize for Carbon Removal at xprize.org, and then look for the carbon removal link. Let's get into the conversation. Welcome back to the show, Nikki, and welcome for the first time, Mike. Nice to have you here today. How are you both doing?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, doing great. Looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with us. As I said in the introduction, you're really trying to kickstart an industry from scratch. What have you learned as a team about doing that and working with 1,300 entrants in a prize over the course of several years to initiate the carbon capture industry?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. It's been a really interesting journey over the last few years. I mean, we as a team started looking at the topic of carbon removal specifically back in 2018 when we designed the prize. And at the time, there really wasn't a carbon removal industry, quote. I think that that's something we're starting to see the early stages of now coming together. So it's really exciting from our perspective to see that growth. But going from a few companies really working at the pioneering end of a new technology that no one had ever seen before to hundreds up to 1,300, that we have in the competition now, people starting new businesses really trying to tackle this challenge. I know that there are a lot of growing pains they're all experiencing, but they're working furiously to really meet the scale of the climate crisis. And I think we're seeing some of the challenges related to obvious things like fundraising and other challenges related to just having people understand what carbon removal is and getting buy-in from communities where projects might go in the future. So they're really working on all cylinders right now to start to build these businesses and grow them. And I'm sure we'll dig into some of those specific challenges in the next little bit here.
I was struck after reading the report by the fact that the barriers identified aren't regarding technology. It sounds like we have that, although that might reflect the optimism of the teams. The blockers are related to funding and the timeline, just the fact that it takes a lot of work to get these projects started and up and running. Based on what you've learned to date, when do you feel that we're going to achieve gigaton scale carbon removal for at least one company?
I think that the nature of the industry is going to evolve in such a way that we don't see just one company making up gigaton scale removal. I mean, we might get to that point someday, but billions of tons of carbon removal is a lot, and it's going to require a lot of projects all over the place, and likely going to require a number of different approaches. And so one of the things we've tried to do with this competition is make sure that as many approaches are supported by the competition as possible, so we can start to highlight the strengths and the weaknesses, not in kind of like a binary way, but start to understand where different approaches could be very powerful and how we can support them all to collectively achieve many gigatons of removal per year.
The prize is going to be awarded in 2025. Do you feel like 5 years after that, we'll see the first few gigaton scale projects achieve? Give me a sense of the timeline society can look to in terms of expectations about our ability to remove carbon.
Yeah, that's a really tough question to answer. I mean, I think, fingers crossed we'll get there. I know that a lot of folks are focused on 2030 goals, and so I think over the next 5 or so years, we're going to start to see much more clarity society-wide in terms of the roles that removals are going to need to play in a net zero economy. What that translates into scale, it's hard to say. I mean, in 2024, we have the challenge for the XPrize is to demonstrate carbon removal at 1,000 tons per year, which is frankly really tiny in the context of gigaton scale carbon removal. But they do represent big projects on a human scale. And those projects, I think, are very powerful to help us as a society understand the implications of carbon removal. What are we talking about? What do these projects look like? How big are they? How many people do they employ? So that's where these early demonstrations can be really important and really catalytic to help jumpstart the industry.
So these initial 15 winners, and this is an interim step, obviously. What stage of development are they? Have they validated prototypes? Are they operating in the lab, or are some of them actually out there capturing carbon?
So the 15 companies that you're referencing received milestone awards from us last year. So that meant we gave them seed funding, basically, of $1 million each to kind of help fuel the early demonstration work of building those projects out. And so those companies, are moving along. They've had about a year or so to kind of get moving, but they are not guaranteed, I guess, a place in the finals, we should say. So we kind of have a blank slate now, and early 2024, we will be getting submissions in again from anyone in this cohort that said they are advancing in the prize. And we'll select 20 official finalists that are in the last round of the competition. And at that point, we will go look at their projects, as Mike mentioned, this 1,000-ton demonstration that they have to build in 2024. And so that will be the kind of pool of potential winners that we'll pick a single grand prize winner from in 2025 that'll get 50 million, and then 3 runners up will split the 30 million that's remaining in the pool. So that's kind of where we're at in the prize right now. Mike, maybe you want to add a little bit about the context of what scale they're at and what that looks like.
One of the advantages of the XPrize model is that we require demonstrations. We really need people to do it. These aren't competitions of ideas, and so we really try to limit the amount of speculation that comes into play when we're doing our analysis. The nature of the challenge is you have to do it, and generally XPrize funding is contingent on having demonstrated something in the real world. That was true when we awarded our 15 milestone winners a couple of years ago. Every team had to show us evidence of some working demonstration. At that time, we weren't requiring complete end-to-end carbon removal, but we wanted to see progress against a plan to build a carbon removal project. For the finals, the final demonstration period, February 1st, 2024 to January 31st, 2025. In that 12 months, the challenge is to demonstrate 1,000 tons of net removals. So teams actually have to do it. I'm really looking forward to watching those 20 finalists next year, because it'll really give us a sense of what are these processes and where are they, and who exactly are working on them. At this time, based on our survey results that we collected in September, we're seeing a lot of great progress. I would say lots of teams are still sort of in that project development, design, engineering, construction phase. And I know that everyone is scrambling to start getting up and running by February 1st, which is when the XPrize demonstration period starts.
Well, this is also a business competition. They have to build a financial model that works. So how are these companies thinking about making money? I know there's you described three categories. They make products from the atmospheric CO2 that they capture. They might sell carbon credits. And then there's a category called neither. What is neither? And what do you sell when you make neither?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think neither are folks who haven't figured out what their business model is yet, probably in most cases. However, I will take nothing off the table because people are very creative and there might be a few new business models that no one has really conceived of around this space that, would be exciting to see emerge, because right now the companies really are dependent on looking to either credits or products as a revenue stream to get going. And especially in the absence of a compliance market, they need to be, functional businesses, or, a lot of them are relying on grant and philanthropic funding in the early days, but they're getting investors and they're going to expect returns. So what does that look like to kind of scale as we're moving into this next kind of generation of projects? And so, it was interesting to see how many companies said they were making products. I think we were a little bit surprised that it was that high, as were many people we've presented this data to at different industry conferences. We know the utilization or carbon product space pretty well, because before this prize, we also worked on that topic in our Energy COSIA Carbon XPrize. It was all about making products. And so there were not hundreds and hundreds of companies at that time making products. So either a lot of new companies are on the scene now kind of trying to do that, or people are realizing, this might be a smart move to have some sort of product for some revenue stream with my carbon removal business, even though their primary goal is to remove CO2 from the air or the ocean. So people are starting to really explore their business models. I mean, we look at business models, I suppose, in a slightly different way, because first and foremost, XPrize is a demonstration competition around the technology itself. And so that's what we're trying to validate and put all of our kind of judging expertise into, looking at that component, because we want to really show the world that certain technologies are better than other through the due diligence and testing process. But we do look at cost as a component of that whole structure. It is one of the kind of evaluation criteria. Mike talked a little bit about scale, and we talked about timing of scaling. So the shorthand that we often use is, for the prize, we're looking at, demonstrating the actual work at 1,000 tons, and then modeling the cost of your projected plant at megaton scale, and then having a pathway that is sustainable to gigaton scale. And so that's how we think about it in the context of the competition, how we bring cost in. And so we're looking at kind of like future projected cost per ton that people might be able to sell at, even though we know that they'll be selling at probably much higher prices in the early days if they start selling credits in 24 or 25. So yeah, that's how we think about it. But Mike might want to add a little bit more color on some of the products that people are making, which are pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, like Nikki said, we were sort of pleasantly surprised, I think, to see just how many teams cited products as either their only revenue stream or part of their revenue mix. I think that sort of highlights one of the interesting nuances of carbon removal as a concept, which is that it is actually very well suited to creating value in tangible ways, in addition to just, drawing down CO2 and helping us meet our net zero targets. There are quite a few product categories that the team cited. The most common ones were building materials, soil related products, energy, and actually quite a few teams working on advanced materials, which would be things like graphite or graphene or carbon fiber, or things of that nature.
Yeah, it's interesting, the idea that we're going to be able to pull advanced materials out of the sky, and for instance, carbon fiber, which we can use to replace steel in auto bodies and so forth, is a remarkable new source of material for us to be able to tap into. Unfortunately, we pack the atmosphere with all this crap, so that we have to do that. But I've also seen things like vodka being made from atmospheric carbon. Is that kind of product in the mix here too?
Yeah, to a certain extent. One of the requirements of this competition is we want to see durable CO2 sequestration. So that presents a challenge for folks who are making things like food and vodka and fuels, because that CO2, while while it may have a lower CO2 footprint than the incumbents, I think that's the goal for everyone working in sustainable products.
Mhm.
That CO2 will re-emit on a relatively short time frame. So we have prioritized what's called durable CO2
Okay.
sequestration. Our requirement is a minimum of 100 years.
Okay.
But lots of great products can play into that mix. Things like building materials, concrete and steel, and those happen to be extremely emissive industries. So it's kind of, we're actually looking at technologies that could be extremely powerful and sort of kill two birds with one stone, if you'll forgive the phrase, in terms of displacing a lot of emissions as well as sequestering emissions.
I also noticed that amongst the carbon credit focused companies, that many had pre-sold credits and so far have only drawn down 1/10 of the amount those credits represent. Carbon credits have suffered from a lot of criticism because of failed projects recently. Are you confident that a transparent and effective carbon market is going to develop that will support this business model?
Yeah, so the question of credits is a really important one, and we kind of wake up every day these days and see a new article about some failure of carbon offset projects of a variety of kinds. So I think, first of all, there's a lot of anxiety in the community around making sure that this emerging carbon removal industry doesn't repeat or isn't susceptible to some of the failures of some of the legacy carbon offset markets. What we've done with the competition is try to lay out really a definition for high quality carbon removal that includes parameters around what we mean when we say net removals, as well as the durability requirements for the sequestered CO2. So, at the highest level, it's kind of like if you can check those few quality boxes that the XPrize rules have established, then we can be pretty comfortable that we're talking about pretty high quality source of CO2 or CO2 removals. Now, it's not without risk. There are still many carbon removal pathways where, issues around permanence or durability, and even in some cases, issues of fundamental quantification of the removals are still a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we try to do is make sure that folks working in those fields aren't like fundamentally excluded from the competition, but really invited to bring innovations that can help us as a community understand what progress is being made against those challenges and hopefully move the ball forward.
Yeah, so you also asked about, just companies selling credits and the process there of selling credits in the future. So many of the companies who are working on contracts in this space aren't able to remove large volumes today of CO2, but they need a source of income to keep doing it in the future. And the companies also want to secure kind of their ability to purchase those high quality credits that Mike's talking about. So what we're seeing are contracts coming into place that are pre-selling credits multiple years into the future. Everybody kind of has a different contract structure that they're working with, but maybe they sell X number in 24 all the way out to 2030, and the numbers increase because they assume that they'll be scaling up and prices hopefully will be going down as they scale up. So all of that kind of mechanics are built into the structure of the agreements. But we face constraints on both the supply side and the demand side in the market here right now. Right now, there just aren't that many suppliers and very few tons that are being removed.
Sure.
But as we move forward, there are not enough buyers to help scale the market. So really the next piece of the puzzle of scaling the whole carbon removal industry is getting more buyers to enter the scene. We've had a handful of really catalytic buyers be very useful for the space. Microsoft, the Frontier group led by Stripe and Shopify and others. And so those folks have helped some of these early carbon removal companies, many of whom are in the competition, have their first sales, which is really helpful for them to raise larger funds against. And so we often talk about this idea of bankable contracts, and that's really something that all of this is fueling in order to get to a scaling goal that we're trying to achieve in the future.
Well, revenue does keep a company alive, and that's certainly the point of this competition. Let's take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back to continue the conversation. And let's get back to the discussion with Nikki Batchelor and Mike Leitch, who lead the XPrize for Carbon Removal. The flip side of the carbon credits conversation is the assertion that this carbon capture technology will excuse and enable the continued emissions of CO2 by industry, especially the fossil fuels industry. What's the XPrize perspective on the role of carbon capture? Is it a drawdown technology, or is it a maintenance technology that facilitates business as usual?
Yes, it's a great question. So our position is similar to many people working in the carbon removal space, that carbon removal is a tool to be used alongside deep emissions reductions. We think that that is first and foremost what needs to be the priority for, climate work right now. But also we know that we're in a position now as a society that carbon removal will also need to happen. And it's at such small early scales that work needs to happen now so that it's ready in the future, whatever that year is exactly that we might need to be at gigaton scale, but 20, 30, 40, 50, we need to put in the work now to scale these early companies and test the technology and make sure we know which ones are most viable to be scaled up in the world. It's also important just to think about there is really no net zero without carbon removal, because you can't zero out every emission in all of society's industrial processes that we've already created over the last decades. And so thinking about carbon removal as a tool to work with difficult to abate industries like aviation and steelmaking, we've talked about that a little bit now, and also thinking about residual emissions that'll still be in the atmosphere. And that's also assuming that we make rapid progress against our climate goals. And we know that we're moving slowly in that direction. So unfortunately, as more time goes and as emission reductions slowly move along at this pace that they're at right now, we might need more in the future. Nobody wants that. But if we get to that point, we might need to fall back on that. So that's kind of our position about how these things work in tandem.
So it's not a silver bullet. It is one of a quiver of tools that you have to use to address the problem of both staying within annual emissions capacity and drawing down in the future.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about a few of the ways that this is being done. So there's the air category, and this looks like the most popular approach is to capture CO2 using solvents. So essentially, you grab the stuff, you strip it off chemically, and then sequester the CO2. How will these technologies be deployed, do you think? Are they going to be standalone facilities like Climeworks in Iceland primarily, or do you see them built into industrial facilities to capture the CO2 right at the smokestack?
Yeah, we're seeing concepts along both lines. One of the advantages to direct air capture is that they are relatively small facilities on a sort of per ton of CO2 captured basis, and you can kind of build them anywhere. The concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere once it leaves the smokestack is pretty well constant almost everywhere on Earth. So that provides opportunities to build these facilities wherever it makes sense to. Usually that means in areas where there's abundant low carbon energy, as well as areas that have advantageous geology for the storage of the CO2.
Another category is the oceans. And here the focus is often on fertilizing the oceans to stimulate plankton or algae growth, which, the bodies of these little creatures fall to the bottom of the ocean, taking the carbon with them for a long time. But some people consider this a form of geoengineering. How does the XPrize assess the risks that have been called out in the application of ocean-based technology?
Yeah, that really is kind of the other end of the spectrum, starting our discussion about with direct air capture and then moving into some of these, biotic ocean or marine CDR approaches. So first of all, some of the approaches that you mentioned, Mitch, are sort of in that category of much harder to measure. And so, first and foremost, the XPrize challenges teams to really make a compelling case that they are able to quantify not only the CO2 that's being drawn down by their project, but also the environmental impact that is created by that project and in fact the risks. I don't want to downplay the risk of some of these more geoengineered approaches, and especially when it comes to the ocean, which is a very complex and very interconnected environment. We really have to proceed with caution. So, within the competition, we've done this in a couple of ways. One is we have very strict requirements for sustainability and making sure that teams are addressing issues of sustainability and environmental impact in each and every project that is considered by the judges. But we've also spent quite a bit of time on studying and talking about and working with partners on issues of responsible deployment, both in the ocean and in other ecosystems.
Now, one of the really intriguing directions is the separation of CO2 from seawater, which is necessary because of the increasing acidification of the oceans. But this seems like it could serve a dual purpose in water-stressed regions if it was combined with desalination systems. Are you guys looking at how these might create complementary benefits as well as additional revenue streams?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an area that we know a number of our teams are exploring as well, who are working on ocean-based solutions. I think there are a handful that are kind of already looking at integrating with existing desalination systems, and others that know that that might be a viable option as they scale up and reach the sizes where they can kind of co-locate or leverage each other's processes. I know XPrize has looked at the topic of desalination quite a bit, and it's definitely a very compelling technology set for thinking about issues of water scarcity. And it also offers different co-benefits that you can, reap from connecting it with carbon removal. Mike, I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one great example of a type of solution that has carbon benefits, but can also provide very useful benefits in specific scenarios. So, is the CDR/desalination industry going to get to 1 or 5 or 10 gigatons per year? I don't know, but it can certainly be helpful in cases where there is water stress, and we can also address some some carbon removal while we're at it.
Yeah, it'd be great to kill two birds with one stone, obviously. Now,
Yeah.
The land and rocks category includes a lot of the nature-based solutions and also agricultural-based solutions. What are the challenges in scaling biomass or enhanced rock weathering? Is it a matter of getting access to a lot of land to reach meaningful carbon capture levels?
I think yes, and one of the advantages of land-based TDR is that land-based carbon management has been around for a long time. When we talk about the legacy carbon offset markets, many of those, a large portion of those markets are talking about, land-based, nature-based solutions.
Mm-hmm.
What we've tried to do with the XPrize requirements is provide an opportunity for land-based carbon management companies to make sure that they fit in that definition of high quality carbon removal. So making sure that the quantification is at the right level and making sure that the durability of the sequestered CO2 is there.
Well, what's the scaling factor, though? Is it access to a lot of land that can be used for drawing down the CO2, or is it simply a matter of increasing the efficiency of the drawdown on a?
We've seen teams trying to innovate on both. There
Okay.
are a lot of studies that show there is plenty of land there we have the capacity in the land
Mhm.
to sustain a variety of different types of land-based CDR, whether that's increasing the standing biomass of a particular parcel of land, or whether that's taking biomass and burying it or converting it into biochar and so on and so forth. So I think from like a systems level, the land is there. From a project level, acquiring the land and getting the land rights and working with local communities to deploy these projects is always a challenge. And so I don't want to make it sound like acquisition of land isn't a barrier, because I think when we're talking about deployment, it requires a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of engagement on the issues to get there.
Now, I know the contest is continuing and you're going to welcome more entrants. Based on what you've seen to date, how do you think the mix of carbon capture technologies is going to play out? Is nature-based solutions going to be a leading direction, or do you see technical innovation being the out front, or how does it mix up a little bit? Can you paint a picture of what the industry will look like, let's say in 2050?
I think that we anticipate the industry will be a portfolio of different solutions. I mean, we have over 20 different carbon removal pathways represented just in the competition, and they all are promising, for their own reasons. And I think that as we see the companies and solutions mature, there will be kind of a natural fit of what makes sense in what location. And so, different cities and countries will have opinions on what solutions come in their area and maybe how that contributes to city and country level climate targets. And we'll also see that certain countries might double down on areas. I mean, we're seeing that a little bit in the US right now with all of the investment in direct air capture through the DAC hubs and everything that Department of Energy is doing. I mean, they're also investing in other areas of carbon removal, but the DAC hubs is definitely having a moment right now. It's a big year, and we're going to see some of these big projects, I think, really take a foothold in the US on that topic. But we're going to see other projects scaling, where it makes sense with, agriculture land and some of the examples that Mike was talking about. And then coastal regions where they have desalination plants, that's going to be a whole different subset. So I think in any scenario, there's going to be quite a diverse representation of projects that we'll see in 2050. I think it's possible that some of them might start scaling faster than others. And so we might see in the earlier days some of these first gigaton projects being in a certain area, but then over time we'll probably see some leveling out there. I bet everybody has a different answer to that question. We're doing the crystal ball question right now. So that's my take on it.
The other crystal ball question that has come to mind for me several times is, what happens when we get to 350 parts per million to these businesses? And as you pointed out earlier, we're never really going to be net zero because everything does produce carbon. But in a low emission society, does this industry become sort of a global air conditioning system that we use to manage the atmosphere and keep it within, a few dozen parts per million of 350?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I know that there have been some folks in the space who have kind of talked about, these CDR technologies as being sort of like a regulator, a thermostat, if you will, to try and sort of make sure that the Earth is a sustainable place to live. I hate to speculate. I mean, I would love to get in that situation. I think that would be that, if we are really in a position where we have to debate, what's next after we accomplish the goals, that just means we're on the right track. So
good problem to have.
Exactly.
So you pointed out we have 20 finalists coming up in 2024. How can folks follow along with what's going on and keep up with how the competition is evolving?
Yeah, good question. So we will be making a big announcement probably around Earth Day next year of the 20 finalists. So once those folks are out in the open, you can pick your favorite, place a bet, see who you want to track. I think we'll be putting out content pretty regularly on all of those teams, video content, social content, so you can see what it really looks like to remove carbon dioxide from the air, the oceans. I think it's such a foreign concept that being able to have visuals and see what it's like on the ground is really helpful just for like a normal person. I'm curious to see it all because, it's new for all of us, but you'll be able to follow along just through the XPrize Climate and Energy newsletter if you want to follow that way. And yeah, we hope you pick a favorite.
Well, I like the idea of placing a bet. Is there a line in Vegas on the XPrize?
There should be.
There ought to be. Hey, Mike and Nikki, thank you very much for spending the time with us today. It's been fascinating.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks.
That was my conversation with XPrize Carbon Removal Competition Executive Director Nikki Batchelor and Technical Lead Mike Leitch. You can keep up on the progress of the 20 finalists that will be competing for the $50 million prize in 2024 at xprize.org. And once you get there, look for prizes and carbon removal, and you'll find all the information that they have published to date. Carbon removal in all its forms is a controversial but promising and important element of humanity's efforts to reverse climate change. CO2 is the indisputable cause of our warming planet. The journal Nature reported in November that 7.3 billion people experienced at least 10 days of extreme weather over the previous year, as global average temperatures reached 1.32 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels. This is bad news. That's the hottest this planet has been during human history, and we're leaving the bounds of the climate in which our species and many others can thrive. Natural approaches, such as enhanced rock weathering and biomass or supplementing agricultural land with biochar, are many people's preferred carbon drawdown option. But we probably need to place many bets to create a diverse set of options if things go really bad. The technical solutions, such as direct air capture using solvents to strip CO2 out of the air, and various ocean-based approaches, need to be explored and readied to keep the planet from warming more than 2 degrees centigrade. At that point, truly catastrophic climate impacts will be inescapable. So given the pace, or more accurately, the lack of progress in reducing emissions, society needs to experiment safely and deliberatively with a variety of carbon removal pathways. And the XPrize Carbon Removal program is really an important undertaking to try to understand what the potential way forward for us is. So we're going to keep you apprised of progress as the carbon removal industry takes shape. I hope you'll stay tuned. And I hope you also take a moment to share this podcast or any of the interviews we've done on sustainability in your ear with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Folks, writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. You are the amplifiers that can help spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell everyone that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any of their favorite purveyors of podcast goodness. Thanks, folks, for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Earth911, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.